The Sailor by Sid Krishna Shiva. On that particular day, I ventured to the beach alone, seeking solace amidst the gentle embrace of the wind. The sun was already beginning its descent, and the majority of beachgoers had departed, leaving only a handful behind. I found myself reluctant to leave. The tranquil atmosphere offered a sense of contentment that I had rarely experienced, even in the comfort of my own home. As the day waned, 3 teenage boys, the last of the beach's occupants, abandoned a castle they had laboriously constructed. One of them remarked, "And the spirit must have departed by now," leaving me perplexed. Soon, I became the sole occupant of the beach. Minutes later, piercing screams pierced the air, originating from the sea. The day's haze obscured the surroundings, making it challenging to identify the source of distress. Instinctively, I headed towards the water, where I spotted a fisherman some distance away, urgently calling for aid. As both an adept swimmer and someone inherently inclined to assist, I swam toward his boat. The vessel appeared to be on the brink of sinking, likely due to a breach below its waterline. However, as my hand clasped onto his, an uncanny sensation enveloped me. In a matter of moments, my pleas for help echoed across the water. Despite my cries, no saviors emerged on the horizon. The clamor persisted, and as I gazed upon the fragmented piece of glass aboard the boat, I was confronted with an inexplicable sight. The reflection staring back at me was not my own. Instead, it bore the likeness of the distressed fisherman. Though my thoughts, emotions, and self-awareness remained intact, the mirror revealed a visage that was not mine. A month has passed since that bewildering occurrence, and I find myself trapped within this surreal predicament, forever trapped in the fisherman's form and endlessly summoning help. However, a glimmer of hope has emerged. A young boy has finally perceived my plight and is approaching me. The Ship at Sea by Slavata. When I was younger, my grandfather would tell stories about a lost ship. The story would go along the lines of how my grandfather was a part of a team sent to find this ship called the Wendover. The team would go off the coast of North Carolina to find this ship. I forgot the rest, but that is how the premise was of the story. I was close to him growing up, but he was always paranoid around water. So when I moved to Holden Beach, North Carolina, we grew apart. He died 2 years after I moved, due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Nobody in the family knows why he did it, not even his wife, my grandmother. He also left everything to me. What's weird about it is he changed his will the day before he died. When I went through his stuff, I found a document from 1975, around the time his ghost ship story would take place. So of course, I read the document, and it talked about the ship, Wendover, the team, including my grandfather, and where to look for the ship. After a week of thinking, I decided to try and find the Wendover. It took another week to find someone willing to take me to look for it. The person's name was Ben. Ben did warn me that he would take me for only an hour. Then he would drive back to shore, unless we found it, of course. Ben was tall, skinny, and had long black hair. He was 6'4", and looked like he weighed around 212 to 234. I couldn't tell. He looked like he was in his late 40s to early 50s. On June 19th, 2019, we went out to find the ship. It took only 47 minutes to find the rusted, slimy, old ship through the fog that day. The ship was a big yacht, about 2 times bigger than Ben's boat, with algae all over the side. The hull of the ship was rusted, with the letters Wade on the side, and the NVR in the name only having outlines of where they once were. Ben was too scared to get on the boat, so he stayed on his as I got on the wind of her. And a good thing, too, as the ship was one step away from collapsing in on itself. I found that the only way forward through the ship was below deck. When I went down below deck, I found a skeleton with withered clothes sitting on a wooden chair at a desk that is collapsing. In his hand was a journal. What was inside is what made me regret coming on the ship at all. On the first page, it had a list of the crew of the ship. Alexander von Cross, the captain; Jamie Westland, engineer; Devin Haley, first officer; Gerald Prince, basic crewman; Paul U. Vidic, navigator. When I read the last name, it sounded familiar, like an old friend or family. Then it hit me. That was my grandfather's name, which seemed impossible at the time, because he was part of the team to save them. I continued reading the journal, and it was normal the first 7 pages. The 8th page is when it went downhill. The day was normal until we had a meeting with the captain. The meeting was out of the blue for all of us. Hell, I was still doing my navigation at the time when it was called. The crew was joking as we waited for the captain to speak. Not for long, though. The captain stood up and stated this message. I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I'm feeling guilty, so here we go. I have made a deal with the devil, that if I brought you out here and left you here, I would get extreme wealth. But then today, he added an extra bit, that a demon serpent would come and kill you all. I cut the deal off as I realized the mistake I was making, and now it will kill all of us. The bad thing is that it comes tonight. Of course, we all thought that this was a joke, but he was dead serious. So I've been praying ever since, hoping that I will live so I can see my girlfriend, as I still need to put a ring on her. I will also be putting this on a desk below deck, hoping Jamie finds it first, as he is just a kid and I'm going to send him down here. P.S. There will be a gun under it for you, Jamie, so you don't suffer. I'll pray for your forgiveness. After reading that passage, I looked at the skeleton and saw a gun in its hand, in a hole in its head. I felt something touch me and heard a voice say,
"Leave here now, grandson."
After I heard that, I bolted out from below deck and into Ben's boat. I yelled at him to drive off, so he did, thankfully. As we pulled off, I saw a serpent-like shadow creature come from below deck. It was what killed the crew, except for my grandfather. Now 4 years later, I see this serpent in the corner of my eye in my house. It followed me home, and now as I type, it is getting closer to me. My name is Alan Vidic, and this is my goodbye. Lights out on the boat. Author unknown. The night was perfect. A moonlit sky filled with stars, soothing music, amazing Caribbean food, and my 2 favorite people, my best friend Thomas and my girlfriend Sarah. I planned to propose to her tonight. Thomas's parents co-owned a country club with other business partners. They funded these boat parties every season out on the Gulf. While the rest of the patrons were inside, I sat outside with Thomas, going over my proposal. "Sarah, will you do me the honor?" "No, that's not good." "You're overthinking it, Dean," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. "It's been 3 years. I see the way she looks at you. You'll get it right, and she'll say yes." I smile and nod in agreement. I hope so. We hear a commotion going on inside and see people beginning to move towards the windows on the other end. "Looks like things are getting good in there without us," Thomas said. "Come on." As we walked towards the entrance, Sarah came rushing at us frantically. "Guys, something is wrong." I could see the fear in her eyes. I knew she was serious. "What happened?" I asked. Sarah began crying. I don't know. They appeared out of nowhere." I looked inside, and I could see everyone looking overboard and talking to each other. "Who's they?" Sarah hugged me and looked at me with tears pouring down her face. She said it so faintly, as if her heart just wouldn't allow the words to come out. "The bodies." Immediately after, the power on the boat went out. I could hear everyone inside begin to panic, some of them screaming, others asking for answers. Security tried to calm everyone, but to no avail. The captain spoke on the intercom. "We are having some technical difficulties right now. Don't worry, we'll be all right. Arriving shortly. Seated." The intercom lost connection, and the boat began to shake, shifting back and forth as if it were a toy and someone was grabbing hold of it. The panic increased, and we ran inside. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. We were several miles from the mainland. If the ship sank right then, it would have been at least 30 minutes before help arrived. I ran towards the other side to see the bodies. To my horror, it looked as if the entire Gulf on that side was filled with bodies, and the mainland was gone. Thomas and Sarah joined me, and we witnessed what looked like something from a movie. It was like we were on a different planet. The boat tilted upward, and people fell into the water. I tried holding on to Sarah, but she fell as well. "No!" I screamed, ready to jump after her. I heard what sounded like a wail. Thomas grabbed my shoulder, frozen with fear. "Dean? Dean! The ocean! Look at the ocean! I don't remember it having eyes." He was right. I couldn't fathom what it was, but it was staring right at us. Sacrifice by 1001 Nights. It was a gorgeous late summer evening at Fish Cove. The sky was tinted with beautiful variations of coral, pink, orange, and red as the sun prepared to set. The large flat white rocks overhanging the quietly heaving ocean were bathed in a brilliant glow. Locals were dotted along the rocks and the boardwalk, which led up to the ocean's edge. Some strolled along the trails and boardwalk, others sat on benches strategically placed along the coast, contemplating the glittering waves and brilliant sky. All the human faces looking very noble and godlike in the golden hour. There was very little chatter, The summer waves and cries of the seagulls drowned any other sounds. A cruise ship moved majestically in the distance as smaller boats bobbed on the waves. Some folks were alone, others in little knots of twos, all spaced well apart. A little family of 4 walked along the boardwalk, which led up to a large flat boulder hanging 20 feet over the ocean. Dad was pushing a stroller, one of those modern ones which looked as though designed to run over into battle, while Mom held the hand of a toddler. They were a postcard-perfect family, looking as if they had just stepped out of a baby designer catalog. Mom's hair shone in the evening light, the same color as the toddler's adorable mop of curls, while Dad's bright baseball cap and fit figure revealed his physical vitality. The family reached the end of the boardwalk. Dad bent and unstrapped the baby from the stroller. Holding the baby close to his chest, he climbed up on the large rock, followed by Mom and toddler, Mom helping toddler up. The family proceeded to the rock's edge and then stood there, solemnly looking out at the ocean and the burning sun. From Dad's arms, the baby emitted a long, lonely cry, a piercing sound which carried over the waves. A couple making out on the bench closest to the rock paused and pulled apart, distracted by the cry. Their eyes flicked over reluctantly to the family, still standing quietly on the rock over the ocean. Dad was petting baby, and toddler was quite still, gripping Mom's hand. For a split second, it seemed as if everything became perfectly still. The waves, the seagulls, the boats. The couple stared at the family. In a smooth arc, Dad flung the baby as far as he could over the waves, crying out, "Accept our sacrifice, Poseidon!" The water seemed to open up. A burst of salty water captured the baby and took it under. The couple watched Mom, Dad, and the toddler turn back. Dad scooped up the toddler and plunked him in the empty stroller, strapping him in safely. Mom raised her hand to her face to dash away a tear or flick away her hair, now whipping around her head in the stiff breeze. They walked away. The couple started kissing again. Ocean View by 1001 Nights. "Come on, Ben," I cried as I scrambled up on the flat white rocks overlooking the sparkling ocean. I looked back. Ben was slouched, turned away from me, face covered by his hoodie. I resisted the urge to yell. Instead, I said, "I wonder if we'll see any seals. Won't that be fun?" All I wanted was to go out with my son for a short walk by the ocean on this balmy evening. It was breaking my heart that he never wanted to spend any time with me. Everybody said it was natural. Teenagers pull away from their parents, refuse to engage, preferring instead to spend hours on their phones with their friends. So am I so unreasonable? After spending the entire past 14 years worrying about and working for my son, that I insist he get out of his stinky room for an hour and come with me to enjoy our beautiful local ocean views? We had walked these trails 100 times together a few years ago. Why was he acting as though I was dragging him to a public execution? "Do you want the binoculars?" I said, ignoring his sour glance. He was fuming because I had made him leave his phone at home. "Do you remember that time we saw a seal?" "Oh, you must have been 9. He sighed heavily. as I brought out the binoculars. "I bet you I'll spot a seal before you." He mumbled something like, "Just shut up about the seals already." But I pretended to ignore it. I was excited at the prospect of seals. The binoculars glued to my face, I scanned the vast blue expanse. I could hear Ben. "Can we go now?" "What? I haven't seen a seal." "Oh." I fell silent. Through the binoculars, I saw a struggling, drowning man. Pure terror distorted his wet face. He seemed completely alone, a little too far from the shoreline. "Mom, did you see a seal? Give me a turn." Ben suddenly spoke loudly in my ear. I brought the binoculars down. Without their aid, the drowning man was barely visible, a speck of rock or trick of the waves by the far shore. "No." I snatched the binoculars away. Ben frowned. "You said you wanted me to spot the seals," he said. I would not let Ben see the drowning man. It was too late to help him. I was too far off. He was too close to death. I needed to protect my son from this sight. "There's no seal," I snapped. "But look, there's a crab in that tide pool." The tricks of motherhood came easily to me. As he looked back, I raised my binoculars again. The head went under for the last time. I caught his final glance, staring straight at me. Then I saw only waves. "There's no crabs, Mom. I want to see seals." I handed him the binoculars. "Here, baby, look." "Then we must be getting back. It's getting chilly." Into the Ocean by iloveallthebacon. I told them I didn't want to go out on the boat. I'm terrified of the ocean. They all know this. Why did I let them convince me? And now, as expected, as always feared, I find myself treading water. It takes every single ounce of my being to try to remain calm. Keep breathing. Don't think of the bottomless empty space beneath you. Don't think of the cold nothingness surrounding you. The water feels thick against my paddling limbs as I look around me, but there is no land in sight. The boat is completely underwater. Don't think of the unknowns. Don't look at the dead bodies of your friends floating around you. The only noise is the lapping of ocean water against my body. But the minuscule sound is almost deafening compared to the complete silence of my surroundings. I force myself to breathe slowly. I'm wearing a life jacket. It should at least keep my head above the water when my legs get tired. After all, the life jackets are keeping my friends afloat. My biggest fear isn't even the ocean anymore. I'm most afraid of whatever has been dragging my friends' bodies underwater, one by one, over the past few hours. Shad Bones by the Prowler. Let me tell you about the story of Shad Bones. A simple description would be he was a bully, just a ruthless son of a bitch who didn't care about anything or anyone but himself. But a more complex description would involve the part where he's also a murderer to boot. Shad was a sailor, tall as a church steeple and as wide as a brick shithouse. Come to think of it, he smelled like one too. I first met the bastard on the Brandywine, a cargo ship going from Pennsylvania to New Orleans. I was the ship's cook, and he was one of the deckhands. Two things stood out when I first met Scheid. He was big, and he was an asshole, like I said. As first impressions go, he didn't give two shits about giving off a good one to anyone. He was like a bull in a china shop, purposely elbowing his way past fellow crew members, acting like he was the top cock around the ship wherever he went, and always picking on crew members he perceived as weak. On this trip, he picked a particular tiny fellow named James Whitley to pick on. James was a tiny, scrawny lad. Think of a toothpick with legs. To be honest, the lad probably had no reason to be a deckhand on a cargo ship, but I'm not going to question how a fella makes a living. Even though this was my first voyage with the two, I had been on enough voyages in my life to know this wasn't going to be a smooth sail to New Orleans. I've been a sailor all my life, and by the time of this first encounter with Scheid, I was already 48 years old. These sea-weathered eyes had seen a lot, and I knew that when a bully like Scheid picked a target, then that target was in for a rough journey. It didn't take too long for the first encounter on the voyage. It happened the first night during dinner. I served some piping hot chowder to the boys, with a ration of bread, and after I served everyone, I fixed myself a bowl and went topside to eat in the cool night sea breeze. I set my bones down up against the port side rail and began to eat. I looked to my right and saw tiny James eating his grub. He noticed me and shook his head and said the chowder was delicious. I thanked him and we continued eating our meal. After a minute or so, I heard a big booming voice from James' direction say, "Hey kid, that chowder be looking real tasty. How about you give me the rest of your food?" It was Scheid, standing over James holding his own bowl of chowder, looking down at James with a smart-assy smirk plastered across his face. James hesitantly replied no. His voice trembled as he uttered the word. "You have your own bowl of food. Leave me alone, Scheid," James continued. That took balls from the lad, I thought, but I knew it wasn't going to end well. Before I could finish my thought, Scheid was on James like a lioness on one of them zebras. He ripped the bowl out of James' hands, and then he kicked James right in the stomach, hard as he could. James crumpled into a ball, writhing in pain. Scheid stood there and shouted, "Next time I tell you I want something, that means I effing want it, boy," and walked off laughing. I sat there for a moment, then got up and walked over to the kid and handed him the rest of my food. I told him to hang in there. I felt sorry for the kid. Like I said, it was only night one, and it was already bad for the kid. Like I knew it would, it only got worse from there. Picking on James daily, taking his food nightly. These abuses went on for weeks. Me and the others tried warning the officers what was happening and that it wasn't going to end well. They always would say, "We'll take care of it," but they never did. Truth be told, I think they were scared of old Shy Bones, as well as the others. Hell, as I sit here in my ripe old age telling you this tale, I'm not afraid to admit I was even a little frightened of Scheid. He was just plumb crazy. Even after months of abuse, some genius gave night watch to James and Scheid, those two together, up on deck alone. It just didn't sit well with me. I had a very bad feeling as my head hit the pillow. Not long into the night my fears were realized, when shouts of "man overboard" could be heard from topside. We all quickly ran up to see what was the matter. Scheid was standing there seeming out of breath. Then he pointed to the railing and said James had fallen over. We rushed over to the railing to try and spot James, but we couldn't see him. We lit every lantern on board and still couldn't spot him. I could hear one of the officers shout, "What's this?" We all rushed over to the railing. He was standing by. He shined his lantern over the railing and the deck boards right under it. It was covered in blood. big pools of blood. Scheid was questioned and said James was walking over near the railing. He slipped, hit his head, and before he could reach him, he fell over the side of the ship. An officer pointed out that Scheid's knife wasn't in its sheath, but he had an answer for that too. He said he had handed it to James to cut some extra rope that was hanging from one of the masts. If you ask me, the story was a crock of shit. But there was no witnesses. Scheid was detained and questioned when we docked in New Orleans, but no one saw anything, so he was released. I personally think he finally killed the poor boy, but there was nothing I could do about it, so that was that. When we returned to Pennsylvania, I tried to forget about Scheid, James, and the ill-fated voyage on the Brandywine. I had taken plenty of jobs on plenty of ships since then. I had heard the Brandywine was sold, and didn't know what had become of big old Shy Bones. I didn't really want to know, to be honest. Then, about 10 years after the voyage on the Brandywine, I took a job as a cook on a whaling ship called the Ocean's Revenge. We were to sail all along the East Coast for a few months' time, catching as many whales as we could. As I stood amongst the crew for orientation and roll call, I could hear a big burly voice to the left of me shout, "I'm right here!" I looked over. I saw it was Scheid Bones, but he hadn't answered to the name Scheid. He was going by the name Brom Johnson, but I know it was him. There's no mistaking that big bastard. Doesn't matter. It's been 10 years or not. You can't forget a killer like that. I guess he changed his name so he could get work, or escape the unwanted attention of the incident. Nobody wants to crew with a suspected murderer after all. As roll call ended and we were dispersing to our stations, ready to set sail, I ran into him. He said pardon me, and acted like he didn't even recognize me. Now I know it's been 10 years, and I know I've gotten a little more grayer and frailer, but I hadn't changed that much. I said pardon me as well, and started walking towards the galley to get prepared for dinner. But when I turned back, I noticed him staring at me, mumbling something to himself. He recognized me. I knew it was him. He obviously doesn't want the attention of what happened 10 years ago. I made my way below deck and the galley and kitchen and started getting things ready. As I started preparing the meal, however, I noticed this face had looked awfully familiar. I stood there for what seemed to be forever, trying to rack my brain. Then that damn Scheid Bones popped into my head and broke my concentration. That's it, I thought. That's why I know this kitchen. I'm on the effing Brandywine. I know this ship looked familiar standing on the deck. New name, new paint, but this is her. There's no doubt about it. This is the Brandywine. I asked the quartermaster, who's been with the ship for quite a few voyages, and asked him if this indeed had been the Brandywine. And when I asked him, his face turned sullen and serious, and whispered, "Shh, be quiet. Don't say that name." I looked at him, dumbfounded. I assure you, and asked why not. He proceeded to tell me that the ship was haunted, and that the Brandywine was eventually sold and given a new name and painted a new color, because people had begun to refuse to sail on her because of the odd, eerie things that happened on each voyage. He swore me to secrecy. He didn't want this getting out and frightening the crew. I agreed and went on about my business. Haunted. I chuckled. I don't know about that. I've never been one of those superstitious sailors, but it was quite eerie back on the Brandywine again, with old Shy Bones, I must admit. I didn't have time to dwell on such things for long, however. I had a dinner to prepare for. Nice hot beef stew with a roll, was on the menu tonight, and dinner came quickly. I served the lads and then went topside to eat in the cool sea breeze. I sat my tired bones down up against the railing and ate my stew, and I looked over to my right. I could make out Scheid in the shadows, his face barely being illuminated by the glow of his match as he lit his pipe. It was strange, though. He looked shaken as he struck the match. I could have sworn I saw big Scheid Bones' hand tremble as he put the match to his pipe. Never thought I'd see that sight. I continued watching him in the corner of my eye as he stood up against the railing, eating his stew. He seemed strange acting. He kept looking over his shoulder like he was hearing something. Voices, sounds, I don't know, but he was acting very peculiar. I shrugged it off, finished my meal, and went to bed. I had a dream about James when I fell asleep, and how Scheid tormented that poor lad. Sometime in the night, we were all awakened by a blood-curdling scream. I quickly got out of bed and rushed up deck. There was already a crowd gathered around the center mast. I pushed my way through the crowd to see what the commotion was, and hanging by a rope tied around his ankle was Scheid, or as the fellows were saying, Brom. Whatever the case, it was him, and he was dead. Just hanging there with an old rusty knife jammed into his stomach. They cut the rope off his foot and laid him across the deck. His face was stretched out in pain, a face I'll never forget. Then someone pulled the old knife from his stomach. I heard someone say, "There's a name carved on that handle." I asked what the name was, and the reply chilled my bones. Still does to this very day. The name that was carved on the old knife's handle was Scheid Bones. Point Nemo by hippiefur. In the middle of the South Pacific Ocean is a spot called Point Nemo, 1,400 miles from any landmass, from anyone or anything. If you were in the center, the closest humans would be in the International Space Station. Ships don't need to pass through Point Nemo. There are faster shipping routes. Currents are strong, but conspire to keep nutrients out rather than keep them in. As such, there's almost no life at Point Nemo, just an endlessly cold and deep abyss. Because of that, Point Nemo is the idealistic place to crash land spacecraft. There must be hundreds of wrecks down there, taken from the edge of one lifeless abyss and sent screaming into another. One Last Dip in the Ocean by Queenofscots. Myra McHenry led her children determinedly over the sand dunes. "Come on, kids. We have time for one last dip in the ocean before we go." Her son Todd struggled wearily over the dunes after her. He was carrying his little sister and dragging his bag with a gallon jug of lukewarm water in it. "Mom, just stop, okay? We can rest, then go on later, when it cools down." "No, we're almost to the water now, just over this hill." Myra reached the top of the dune and stopped, confused. It was here. The ocean was right here. "Mom, let's just stop and rest a while." His mother sank into the sand. "But we're so close. Just over one more dune, and we can cool off in the water. See it?" She points, and for one crazy moment, Todd thought he could see the sparkle of the ocean. He shook his head to clear it and looked pityingly at his mother. "No, Mom, the car broke down. Remember? We need to get help." He looked hopelessly across the desert. The last sign had said the nearest town was 14 miles away, and they hadn't seen a single car all day. "No, the ocean is right over there." Myra ran, shrieking, laughing. "Race you!" Then finally collapsed, sobbing, clawing at her face and throat. Blood was running down her cheeks and neck. "Mom," Todd began, then started walking away. Just let her go, he thought. Easier without her. Only 8 more miles. A gallon of water. Surely he could make it. He took a drink, shifted his sister to his other side, and walked on. Hope by H.R. Welch. After my grandma died, it was up to me to clean the house and make it presentable to sell as soon as possible. While doing that, I stumbled upon an old journal that she kept. I flipped to a random page and found this creepy story that some ancestor of mine wrote. For background, my ancestor's name was Ambrose, who was on a whaler boat named Jenny back in 1840. That year, they found a ghost ship partially frozen inside the Drake Passage down in Antarctica. They went to check it out, and after boarding the ship, they quickly uncovered a disturbing scene that painted a morbid picture. The kitchen was well used, and the bones that remained in the pots were all human. In the lower decks, they found the bones of 5 men who were chained and locked up in makeshift cages. They found the captain in his cabin. He was dead and holding a pen in his hand. He had been dead for years, but the cold kept him remarkably well preserved. The last thing he wrote was, "No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive." The name of the ghost ship was Hope. It was found on the 17th anniversary of its disappearance. The Bottom of the Ocean. Author unknown. Humanity has explored much farther in space than inside the deepest, darkest parts of our oceans. What happens at the bottom, where light can't reach, where creatures unknown exist, where life itself is a mystery? Well, good news. I did finally reach the bottom and can answer all of your questions today. So let's begin with the basics. There is no light at the bottom. Artificial lights will not survive after a few miles. There is no sound. Don't believe those who tell you about creepy sounds at the bottom. You can't even hear yourself breathe. It's so nice and quiet. As far as creatures go, you can feel them floating around you, but nothing like a fish with a bulb on its head. It's more like being in the middle of a crowded concert, but you can't really see anything, so after a while, you'll get used to feeling that way. Yes, sometimes you'll feel yourself being held, your arm or leg or face being squeezed, but they grow tired of that quickly and leave you alone. It hurts in the beginning, but you'll also stop feeling pain after a while. You don't even move around that much. No need to do anything as annoying as paddle constantly. The ocean is there to help you stay in place. You also stop stressing about time after a while. After all, who needs to think about minutes or hours, or days. Being free from the shackles of time is such a blessing. I don't even know when I got here. Maybe it was a few days ago. That's funny. I can't remember how I got here. Oh well. The best part, though, is you don't need to breathe down here either. You're so at peace that you forget all about breathing or eating. There are those small moments when you feel yourself suffocating a little bit, but that's easy to fix. All you gotta do is squeeze tightly, and the feeling will be gone. It's so nice here. I think I'm gonna stay. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.